Hey, good evening. It's Thursday, June 15th, and welcome to Everyday Talk 24/7. We're looking at this section in Ephesians 4, which lays out this new life for us. And the section we'll be looking at tonight tells us how we can be free from ourselves, how you can be free from yourself. Remember, we started looking at Ephesians 4:17, where Paul says, I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you no longer live as the Gentiles do. And the Gentiles here don't represent just the people who are ungodly in the city of Ephesus. They represent anyone who is not walking after God, does not have their life based upon a biblical worldview that's solid. At that time, the only people that had that perspective were the Jews, the Jewish heritage and foundation. And in the book of Ephesians, Paul starts to knit the Gentiles and the Jews together. But it's based upon new life in Christ. And so, as we've been reading, Paul warns against being caught up with living like the Gentiles do. Remember, we had three ways where we're dealing in frustration, our futile thinking, where our hearts have become dark and hard, and that leads us to being insensitive, callous, unfeeling, where we only care about ourselves. And when that happens, that leads us into this drive, this push, this urge to satisfy the sinful cravings of our flesh, what's been left over from that old nature that Christ died and was crucified with him. So those things, Paul is saying, you don't have to be led by them anymore. And furthermore, he says very clearly in verse 20, you didn't come to know Christ that way, through that methodology. That this Gentile world, this world that is anti-God, teaches. But you came to know him in a different way. I'm looking at verses 22 to 24 tonight. You were taught with regard to your former way of life, all of us, that life we want to get rid of, that life that was a slave to the ways of the king of this world, to our own cravings and desires, our own fears. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted. And we've seen that by these deceitful desires. It tricks us, right? It promises one thing and it never delivers. It promises freedom, but it brings slavery. It promises hope, but all it does is bring despair. It promises pleasure. All it does is leave us with an insatiable desire for more and more and more and more, and it never satisfies. So he says, put off that old way, and that's common to all of us, to be made new in the attitude of your minds. Recalling what he's been looking at when he said in Romans 12:2, which we spent some time on, being transformed. Well, don't be conformed. It's another way of saying Romans 12:2. Don't be conformed anymore to the way of this world, to the patterns of this world. And those patterns are what? Futility, a darkness, a hardness, a lack of sensitivity, and a craving for stuff to please us. Don't be conformed to those patterns anymore, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you can know what the wonderful will of God is for your life. To be made new in the attitude of your minds. That's what's being said here in Ephesians 4:23. And to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. And again, Paul is bringing to mind what he said just a couple of paragraphs earlier in Ephesians 2:10. You are God's workmanship, God's poema, his work of art and progress, created for good works, which he prepared in advance for us to do. This is how we can be free from ourselves, free from what you want to belong, but cut free from those old patterns of living that brought you anxiety and that still bring you anxiety when you follow that way, that bring you fear, that cause you to doubt yourself, to defend yourself and protect yourself when God has already done that for you. We are new in Christ, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. That's this new self. You are God's poema, his workmanship, created to be like God, to be like his Son. And then we have a pattern to follow. And Paul gets into that more in chapter 4, and I might get into that, I'm not sure yet. But Paul gets into that in the balance of chapter 4, where he says, live as children of light, as he flows into chapter 5. And that's what we want to be. We want to be children of light. We want to be free from our old selves, which did nothing but just drag us down. We want to be free from being conformed to the things of this world. I want to be free from your futility. The tractor going by. I want to be free from futility. I want to be free from darkness and a hard heart. I want to be free from not being able to be feeling and sensitive and caring for others. Rather, I want to be able, free, to put myself, yourself, in the rearview mirror and move on to where this beautiful picture here in verses 22 to 24, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted with its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your mind, to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. We can be free from everything that we hate about ourselves and long and participate and grow in what God has made us to be. That's where our hope is. That's where our joy is. Give that some thought. We got Q&A Friday coming tomorrow. Have any questions, send them in. And again, look at these passages here from Ephesians 4 through 17 to 24. This is literally a pattern how we can change our lives and be free from ourselves and free to be new in Christ. And that's worth living for. You have a great evening. Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. It is such a huge encouragement.